All right, good evening, everyone. How are you doing today? I hope you answered well. Tonight we are going to read chapter 26 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. The title is I Fell into Captivity. Now, before we start, I just wanted to show you something. Now you're going to think I'm very weird, but one of the supporting characters of this book is Uriah Heep. He's a weird person. He's a villain in this book. And actually the last chapter had a lot to do with Uriah Heep. So I just wanted to show you, this is a lamp. Can you see the whole thing? Wait, let me see. This is a lamp next to my bed. And this is a statue of Uriah Heep. So I have a Uriah Heep lamp next to my bed. That's true. That's a real thing. So every night I go to bed with Uriah Heep. Okay. That really is Uriah Heep. All right, well, let's read. Let's start reading. Oh, if this is your first time watching, we're not just reading the chapter, we're not just reading the words, but as we go, we're discussing vocabulary that could be interesting or useful to you, or phrases which maybe you don't understand. So if you're watching this live with me, then I encourage you to make questions in the comments, and I will stop and answer your questions about vocabulary or phrases that we've read that maybe are not clear. Or if you don't understand something, I will explain it to you. All right, well, let's get started with chapter 26. I fell into captivity. I saw no more of Uriah Heep until the day when Agnes left town. I was at the coach office to take leave of her. That's an old-fashioned way of saying goodbye. So I was at the coach office, like the bus station, to take leave of her and see her go. And there was he, returning to Canterbury by the same conveyance. It was some small satisfaction to me to observe his spare, short-waisted, high-shouldered, mulberry-colored greatcoat perched up in company with an umbrella like a small tent, and on the edge of the back seat on the roof, while Agnes was, of course, inside. It's funny because I'm doing another book, and this morning we had to talk about the word perch. I'm reading Animal Farm in the mornings, and I'm reading David Copperfield at night. Let's take a look at what perched means, because here it's being used in an abstract way. When you use the word perch, you are talking about the way that a bird stands somewhere. A bird cannot just stand on its feet. A bird is always not always, but most of the time a bird is grabbing something. And that's what a bird does. A bird perches. It doesn't stand, it perches. This is a bird perched on a branch. If you have a pet bird, or you keep a bird in your home, you have to buy an artificial perch, because birds always like to stand on something. And this is called a perch. That's a bird perch. But when something is very high, for example, if you take a book and you put it on the top bookshelf, you can say that the book is perched on the shelf, and that means it's standing very high somewhere. So it's used very much like that when something is very high up. Here, let's take a look at how they used it again. It was some small satisfaction to me to observe his spare means extra, short-waisted, high-shouldered, mulberry-colored greatcoat perched in company with an umbrella like a small tent on the edge of the back seat on the roof, while Agnes was, of course, inside. So Davy notices that Uriah's belongings, his things, are perched high on top of the coach. So Uriah is probably sitting on top of the coach, and he feels happy because Agnes was inside the coach. They would not be sitting together. But what I underwent in my efforts to be friendly with him while Agnes looked on perhaps deserved a little recompense. At the coach window, as at the dinner party, he hovered about us without a moment's intermission. So hovering, that means he's standing behind them very close. And it says without a moment's intermission, with never stopping, without any rest. He was always behind us, hovering over us. Wellington Cardoso says hello. Hi, Wellington. How are you doing today? Like a great vulture, gorging himself on every syllable that I said to Agnes, or Agnes said to me. In the state of trouble into which his disclosure by my fire had thrown me, I had thought very much of the words Agnes had used in reference to the partnership. So Davy is saying, I've been worried ever since that night that he confessed to me that he was in love with Agnes. Disclosure means like telling a secret. So in the state of trouble, in the state of being worried, into which his disclosure, his telling me the secret, by my fire had thrown me, I thought very much about the words Agnes had used in reference to the partnership. I did what I hope was right, feeling sure that it was necessary for Papa's peace that the sacrifice should be made. I entreated him to make it. So he's remembering the words that Agnes told him regarding her father making Uriah a partner. And she said, I did what I hoped was right. And Davy's thinking about those words. A miserable foreboding that she would yield to and sustain herself by the same feeling in reference to any sacrifice for his sake had oppressed me ever since. I knew how she loved him. I knew what the devotion of her nature was. He's talking about her father, not Uriah. I knew from her own lips that she regarded herself as the innocent cause of his errors, and as owing him a great debt she ardently desired to pay. I had no consolation in seeing how different she was from this detestable Rufus with the mulberry-colored greatcoat, for I felt in the very difference between them and in the self-denial of her pure soul that the sordid basement of his, the greatest danger lay. All this, doubtless, he knew thoroughly, and had his cunning considered well. Okay, very complicated, but he's saying, I understand Agnes's point of view. She's very sweet and very innocent, and she's so devoted to her father that she would do anything. And Uriah, who's disgusting and creepy, knows this. And he's going to use it to his advantage. He's going to take advantage of her. And her nice nature, her good nature. Yet, I was so certain that the prospect of such a sacrifice, afar off, must destroy the happiness of Agnes. And I was so sure from her manner of its being unseen by her then, and having cast no shadow on her yet, that I could soon have injured her, as given her any warning of what impended. Thus it was that we parted without explanation, she waving her hand and smiling farewell, from the coach window, her evil genius writhing. That's writhing, the movement of a snake, writhing. Her evil genius writhing on the roof, as if he had her in his clutches and triumphed. I could not get over this farewell glimpse of them for a long time. When Agnes wrote to tell me of her safe arrival, I was as miserable as when I saw her going away. Whenever I fell into a thoughtful state, this subject was sure to present itself, and all my uneasiness was sure to be redoubled. Hardly a night passed without my dreaming of it. It became part of my life, and as inseparable from my life as my own head. I had ample leisure to refine upon my uneasiness, for Steerforth was at Oxford, as he wrote to me, and when I was not at the Commons, I was very much alone. I believe I had at this time some lurking distrust of Steerforth. So remember, Steerforth is Davy's best friend, Davy's hero. He loves Steerforth, but he's suddenly starting to think, maybe Steerforth is not such a good person. And part of the reason he thinks that is because Agnes does not like him. I wrote to him most affectionately in reply to his, but I think that I was glad upon the whole that he could not come to London just then. I suspect the truth to be that the influence of Agnes was upon me, undisturbed by the sight of him, and that it was more powerful with me because she had so large a share in my thoughts and interest. So Davy is even thinking, maybe I'm starting not to like Steerforth because of what Agnes said. Maybe he really is okay, but maybe it's just the influence of Agnes. In the meantime, days and weeks slipped away. I was articled to Spenlow and Jorkins. Wellington Cardoso is asking, what is lurking? Oh, that's a good question. Let's take a look. Thank you for asking. Let's see if I can find a picture. Lurking. These are some good pictures. Lurking kind of means like hiding, being off to the side, like this person is lurking. Let's see if we can find a better picture. Oh, here's a good one. Wait. You see, this person is almost hidden. They're off to the side, and they're kind of watching things. Lurking. That's lurking. Oh, here's a cat. Lurking. It's kind of like getting ready to attack something. You stand off to the side and you look. Let's see. How was it used here? Let's go back and read it again to see if it makes sense. I was very much alone. I believe I had at this time some lurking distrust of Steerforth. All right, so this is not literal. This is like a feeling of, I don't trust him. But it's not the principal feeling that he has. It's just there on the side, and he can see it, and it's looking at him, but it's not the principal feeling. I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit complicated, a little bit abstract, the way that they're using it here. In the meantime, the days and weeks slipped away. I was articled to Spenlow and Jorkins. I had £90 a year, exclusive of my house rent and sundry collateral matters from my aunt. My rooms were engaged for 12 months certain, and though I still found them dreary means like depressing, of an evening, and the evenings long, I could settle down into a state of equable low spirits and resigned myself to coffee, which I seem, on looking back, to have taken by the gallon at about this period of my existence. At about this time, too, I made 3 discoveries. First was that Mrs. Krupp was a martyr to a curious disorder called the spasms. Do you know, a spasm is like when your muscle moves. You know, sometimes in the spring, if you have an allergy, maybe my eye does that sometimes. It just moves involuntarily. That's a spasm. Or sometimes your nose does a spasm. Sometimes I get a spasm in my back, and that hurts very much. It's like a contraction of muscles. So Mrs. Krupp has this imaginary illness called the spasms. I don't know if it's imaginary, but based on what I know of her, it seems like it probably is. Which was generally accompanied with inflammation of the nose and required to be constantly treated with peppermint. Secondly, that something peculiar in the temperature of my pantry made the brandy bottles burst. Thirdly, that I was alone in the world, and much given to record the circumstance in fragments of English versification. On the day when I was articled, to be articled, I think that means that now he's a lawyer. So he's been studying law for a while, but now he's officially a lawyer. Let me just make sure about that. To be articled, bound or forced by contract, synonyms: apprenticed, bound, indentured, unfree. Oh, hampered and not free, not able to act at will. That just means, so he's just at the period of his training where he was accepted into the institution. There was a trial period to see if he liked it, and a trial period to see if they liked him, and then they decided after a few months, or 3 or 4 months, to give him articles, meaning he was now in a contract with them, and he was not free. So he was in their power, and he couldn't just leave if he wanted to. And they couldn't, I think they also couldn't make him leave if they wanted to. I don't really understand the details of that, but something like that. On the day when I was articled, no festivity took place beyond my having sandwiches and sherry. We can maybe think of that as being accepted. They accepted him and said, okay, we will train you to become a lawyer. So it was a reason to celebrate. No festivity took place beyond my having sandwiches and sherry in the office for the clerks, and going alone to the theater at night. I went to see The Stranger, as a Doctor's Commons sort of play, and was so dreadfully cut up that I hardly knew myself in my own glass when I got home. Mr. Spenlow remarked on this occasion, when we concluded our business, that he should have been happy to have seen me at his house at Norwood to celebrate our becoming connected, but for his domestic arrangements being in some disorder on account of the expected return of his daughter from finishing her education at Paris, but he intimated that when she came home he should hope to have the pleasure of entertaining me. I knew that he was a widower, and that his own daughter, and with one daughter, and expressed my acknowledgments. So Mr. Spenlow is saying, I feel bad because we've accepted you into this important position, important for Davy. I feel bad that I couldn't invite you home, but right now my home is kind of a mess because my daughter is just returning from school in Paris. And also, it's not easy for him to do these sorts of things because he's a widower. He doesn't have a wife. His wife is dead. So it's only him and his daughter. But he promised that once everything is back to normal, that he wants to invite Davy to his home. Mr. Spenlow was as good as his word. In a week or two, he referred me to this engagement and said that if I would do him the favor to come down next Saturday and stay until Monday, he would be extremely happy. Of course, I said I would do him the favor, and he was to drive me down in his phaeton to bring me back. Phaeton, that must be some kind of carriage. Let's take a look. Phaeton. Yeah. Well, it's the name of a car, too. Not a bad-looking car. It's a Volkswagen. Wait, I didn't know that it was a Volkswagen. So a Volkswagen has that name. But this type of phaeton, I'm sure, is like this, because we're talking about 170 years ago. When the day arrived, my very carpet-bag was an object of veneration to the stipendiary clerks, to whom the house at Norwood was a sacred mystery. One of them informed me that he had heard that Mr. Spenlow ate entirely off plate and china. And another hinted at champagne being constantly on draft. All right, so when the day arrived for Davy to go spend the weekend at Mr. Spenlow's, he took his bag with him. And so he's at the office, and all of the other clerks who work there are saying, "Wow, you're going to spend the weekend?" And they have all these, they don't know it, they've never been there. I don't know why Davy is special here, and received an invitation to spend the weekend. Maybe his aunt paid extra money. Who knows? But they're very impressed that he's going to spend the weekend at Mr. Spenlow's. And they've never been there, but they have these stories about how he's always drinking champagne and eating from very fancy dishes. After the usual custom of table bear, the old clerk with the wig, whose name was Mr. Tiffy, had been down on business several times in the course of his career, and had on each occasion penetrated the breakfast parlor. He described it as an apartment of the most sumptuous nature, and said that he had drunk brown East India sherry there, of the quality so precious as to make a man wink. I don't know what that means. This is winking. But I don't understand that expression. We had an adjourned cause in the consistory that day about excommunicating a baker who had been objecting in a vestry to a paving rate. And as the evidence was just twice the length of Robinson Crusoe, according to the calculation I made, it was rather late in the day before we finished. However, we got him excommunicated for 6 weeks and sentenced in no end of costs. And then the baker's proctor and the judge and the advocates on both sides, who were all nearly related, went out of town together, and Mr. Spenlow and I drove away in the phaeton. The phaeton was a very handsome affair. The horses arched their necks and lifted up their legs as if they knew they belonged to Doctors' Commons. There was a good deal of competition in the Commons on all points of display, and it turned out some very choice equipages then, though I always have considered, and always shall consider, that in my time the great article of competition there was starch, which I think was worn among the proctors at as a great extent as it is in the nature of man to bear. So Davy is saying Mr. Spenlow and I drove off together in the carriage, and the horses were very beautiful and the carriage was very beautiful. And he said in Doctors' Common, this area where these lawyers work and have their offices, all of the lawyers and all of the owners of law firms always tried to make a great display of how successful they were. So that's why the horses were so beautiful and the carriage was so beautiful. It was important for Mr. Spenlow to look very important. But he says the thing that was number one important was starch. Let me show you a picture. Starch is, wait, let's see, clothes, starch. I guess there are different kinds of starch. I wonder if people still use it. It doesn't seem very common. Well, here's a picture of some starch. Starch is something you can put on your clothes to make them very stiff. Wait, let's see. Maybe we can have a comparison. Starched versus unstarched. Starched versus unstarched. Okay, so you can see the difference, I think. So this is just a regular shirt on the left, and then on the right is a starched shirt. So it doesn't wrinkle, it's very, very straight. But also it could be uncomfortable because it makes the clothes very hard. So when you talk about someone in a, like, for example, a starched collar, they sound very serious, like they can't move. And he's saying that, yes, the owners of the law firms, they had very fancy carriages and fancy horses, but the number one thing that they always did was put a lot of starch in their clothes. And the more starch you had, the more important you looked. We were very pleasant going down, and Mr. Spenlow gave me some hints in reference to my profession. He said it was the gentlest profession in the world, and must on no account be confounded with the profession of a solicitor. So he's saying we're different from your typical lawyer, and don't confuse being a lawyer with what we do. I don't really understand the difference. I think they explained it earlier, but I forgot, and I don't really know. And must on no account be confounded with the profession of a solicitor, being quite another sort of thing, infinitely more exclusive, less mechanical, more profitable. We took things much more easily in commons than they could be taken anywhere else, he observed. And that set us as a privileged class. So he's saying it's better to be one of us than to be your typical lawyer. He said it was impossible to conceal the disagreeable fact that we were chiefly employed by solicitors, but he gave me to understand that they were an inferior race of men, universally looked down upon by all proctors of any pretensions. I asked Mr. Spenlow what he considered to be the best sort of professional business. He replied that a good case of a disputed will, where there was a neat little estate of 30 or 40,000 pounds, was perhaps the best of all. In such a case, he said, not only were there very pretty pickings, pretty pickings, that means, picking is like this. This is picking. So this is a very, I think, crude way of saying you could make a lot of money. Pretty pickings. So in a legal case where there's a problem with the will, with the last will of the person who died, there were lots of pretty pickings, little things that you could get, money that you could make. In the way of arguments at every stage of the proceedings, and mountains upon mountains of evidence on interrogatory and counter-interrogatory. Well, he's saying pretty pickings, let's see, not only were there pretty pickings in the way of arguments, well, actually, no, this is more intellectual. He's saying there are all kinds of interesting ways that you could argue when there's a will being contested. To say nothing of an appeal lying first to the delegates and then to the lords, but the costs being pretty sure to come out of the estate at last. Both sides went at it in a lively and spirited manner, and expense was no consideration. Then he launched into a general eulogium. Oh my. Let's see how to pronounce that word. Eulogium. A eulogy is something that you say, that's like the speech that you make when someone dies. Oh, he was a wonderful person. Oh, we've already looked up this word because I have it in purple. A formal expression of praise for someone who has recently died. Yeah, it's related to the word eulogy. But is it eulogium or eulogium? Eulogium pronunciation. I think it's probably eulogium, but let's see. Pronunciation. How do you pronounce eulogio?
Consulta tu saldo en movimientos.
Oh I just want to see it spelled somewhere. I don't want to watch a video. Oh well, we can't. As usual with Google, you can't find an answer to anything anymore. Oh well. Okay, I think it's eulogium. That's how I'm going to say it. Okay. Then he launched into a general eulogium on the Commons. What was to be particularly admired, he said, in the Commons, was its compactness. It was the most conveniently organized place in the world. It was the complete idea of snugness. Remember, snug means to feel warm and comfortable and nice. It lay in a nutshell. For example, you brought a divorce case or a restitution case into the consistory. Very good. You tried it in the consistory. You made a quiet little round game of it among a family group. You played it out at leisure. Suppose you were not satisfied with the consistory. What did you do then? Why, you went to the Arches. What was the Arches? The same court, in the same room, with the same bar, and the same practitioners, but another judge. For there, the consistory judge could plead any court day as an advocate. Well, you played your round game out again. Still, you were not satisfied. Very good. What did you do then? You went to the delegates. Who were the delegates? Why, the ecclesiastical delegates were the advocates without any business, who had looked on at the round game when it was playing in both courts, and had seen the cards shuffled and cut and played, and had talked to all the players about it, and now came fresh as judges to settle the matter to the satisfaction of everybody. Discontented people might talk of corruption in the Commons, closeness in the Commons, and the necessity of reforming the Commons, said Mr. Spenlow solemnly in conclusion. But when the price of wheat per bushel had been the highest, the Commons had been the busiest, and a man might lay his hand upon his heart and say to this whole world, touch the Commons and down comes the country. I listened to all of this with attention, and though I must say I had my doubts whether the country was as much obliged to the Commons as Mr. Spenlow made out, I respectfully deferred to his opinion. That about the price of wheat per bushel, I modestly felt too much for my strength, and quite settled the question. I have never, to this hour, got the better of that bushel of wheat. It has reappeared to annihilate me, all through my life, in connection with all kinds of subjects. I don't know now exactly what it has to do with me, or what right it has to crush me, on an infinite variety of occasions, but whenever I see my old friend, the bushel, brought in by the head and shoulders, as he always is, I observe, I give up a subject for lost. This is a digression, and I was not the man to touch the Commons and bring down the country. I submissively expressed my silence, my acquiescence in all I had heard from my superior in years and knowledge. And we talked about the stranger and the drama and the pairs of horses until we came to Mr. Spenlow's gate. There was a lovely garden to Mr. Spenlow's house, and though I was not the best time of the year for seeing a garden, it was so beautifully kept that I was quite enchanted. There was a charming lawn. There were clusters of trees. A cluster is like a grouping. So a group of trees, a cluster of trees. There were clusters of trees. And there were perspective walks that I could just distinguish in the dark. Arched over with trellis work, on which shrubs and flowers grew in the growing season. Here, Miss Spenlow walks by herself, I thought. Dear me. We went into the house, which was cheerfully lighted up, and into a hall where there were all sorts of hats, caps, greatcoats, plaids, gloves, whips, walking sticks. "Where is Miss Dora?" said Mr. Spenlow to the servant. Dora, I thought. What a beautiful name. We turned into a room near at hand. I think it was the identical breakfast room made memorable by the brown East Indian sherry. I heard a voice say, "Mr. Copperfield, my daughter, Dora, and my daughter Dora's confidential friend." It was no doubt Mr. Spenlow's voice, but I didn't know it. I didn't care whose it was. All was over in a moment. I had fulfilled my destiny. I was a captive and a slave. I loved Dora Spenlow to distraction. She was more than human to me. She was a fairy. A fairy, in case you don't know, is a magical creature. Wait, let's see. She was a fairy. She was a sylph. I don't know what she was. I don't know what a sylph is. Let's look at a fairy, and then we'll look for a sylph. So in case you don't know what a fairy is, it's a magical creature. Maybe you'll recognize these pictures. These are fairies. Now, sylph, I don't know that word. Let's see. What is a sylph? I guess it's the same thing. They look the same to me. That's a sylph, according to Google. Fairy, I know, is a common word, but sylph, I don't know. I don't know what she was. Anything that no one ever saw, and everything that everybody ever wanted. I was swallowed up in an abyss of love in an instant. There was no pausing on the brink, no looking down or looking back. I was gone, headlong, before I had sense to say a word to her. I observed, as well-remembered voice, when I bowed and murmured something, have seen Mr. Copperfield before. The speaker was not Dora. No, the confidential friend. Miss Murdstone. All right, so if you're just joining us and you haven't been following the story, Davy was born to his mother, and his father had died before he was born. So his mother was very young and alone when he was born. And after a few years, I think maybe 5 years, she decided to remarry. And she married a horrible, horrible man named Mr. Murdstone. And Mr. Murdstone hated Davy, and Davy hated Mr. Murdstone. Mr. Murdstone had a sister, an evil, awful, horrible witch of a sister named Miss Murdstone. And Miss Murdstone is Dora's confidential companion. That's like a job. So she's being paid. It's not her friend. It's more like a secretary who follows her wherever she goes and reads her books and writes letters for her. But so Davy is in love with this girl Dora, and Miss Murdstone, the evil sister of his stepfather, is her employee, her secretary, her confidential companion. I don't think I was as much astonished. To the best of my judgment, no capacity of astonishment was left in me. There was nothing worth mentioning in the material world but Dora Spenlow to be astonished about. I said, "How do you know Miss Murdstone?" "I hope you are well," she answered. "Very well," I said. "How is Mr. Murdstone?" That's his ex-stepfather. "How is Mr. Murdstone?" she replied. "My brother is robust. I'm obliged to you." Mr. Spenlow, who I suppose had been surprised to see us recognize each other, then put in his word. "I'm glad to find," he said, "Copperfield, that you and Miss Murdstone are already acquainted." "Mr. Copperfield and myself," said Miss Murdstone with severe composure. To be composed means to not show any emotion, and severe means extreme. So she had extreme composure. She did not express surprise or happiness or sadness or any feeling. You could not read what she was feeling because she had severe composure. "Mr. Copperfield and myself," said Miss Murdstone, with severe composure, "are connections. We were once slightly acquainted. It was his childish days. Circumstances have separated us. I should not have known him. That means I would not have recognized him if I didn't know his name. The last time that Davy saw Miss Murdstone, he was maybe 8 or 9 years old. Because when his mother died, Mr. Murdstone, who hated him, sent him away. While his mother was alive, Mr. Murdstone paid for him to go to a horrible school where they used to beat him. But when his mother died, he wasn't obligated. He didn't have to pay for the schooling anymore. So he made him go to London and work in a very horrible place. And Davy was in such a horrible state and condition and so depressed. At the age of 8 or 9, he ran away from this job he was forced to do. And he ran away to his aunt. But when he arrived at his aunt's house, she had no choice. She had to contact Mr. Murdstone and say, "Davy is here with me." So the last time that Davy saw Miss Murdstone was the day that Mr. and Miss Murdstone came to his aunt's house and said, "Okay, give him back." And the aunt said, "No, you two are horrible. Get out of here." And so she made them go away, and she raised Davy since that day, and he's never seen them again. Now Davy, this is like maybe 11 or 12 years later. So Miss Murdstone says, if I didn't know his name, I wouldn't know that it was Davy. Okay, I'm just going to take a 1-minute break, and I will return, and we will continue with the reading of chapter 26. Okay, thank you for waiting. Miss Murdstone has had the goodness, said Mr. Spenlow to me, to accept the office. Oh wait, I think I better go back. Mr. Copperfield and myself, said Miss Murdstone, with severe composure, are connections. We were once slightly acquainted. It was in his childish days. Circumstances have separated us. I should not have known him. I replied that I should have known her anywhere, which was true enough. Miss Murdstone has had the goodness, said Mr. Spenlow to me, to accept the office, if I may so describe it, of my daughter Dora's confidential friend. My daughter Dora, having unhappily no mother, Miss Murdstone is obliging enough to become her companion and protector. A passing thought occurred to me that Miss Murdstone, like the pocket instrument called a life preserver, was not so much designed for purposes of protection as of assault. So the father is saying Miss Murdstone's job is to be my daughter's companion because she doesn't have a mother, and to protect her. And Davy's thinking, Miss Murdstone, protect her? No, Miss Murdstone would probably assault her, attack her, not protect her. But as I had none but passing thoughts for any subject save Dora, I glanced at her directly afterwards, and was thinking that I saw, in her prettily pettish manner, that she was not very much inclined to be particularly confidential to her companion and protector when the bell rang. So Davy's just thinking, what is going on here? This is crazy. But when he looks at Dora, he can see she doesn't really like Miss Murdstone. That's obvious. So, her father hired Miss Murdstone to be her companion, but, Dora doesn't seem to like her. When a bell rang, and Mr. Spenlow said was the first dinner bell, and so carried me off to dress. The idea of dressing oneself or doing anything in the way of action in that state of love was a little too ridiculous. I could only sit down before my fire, biting the key of my carpet-bag, and think of captivating, girlish, bright-eyed, lovely Dora. What a form she had! What a face she had! What a graceful, variable, enchanting manner! The bell rang again so soon that I made a mere scramble for my dressing. To scramble is to hurry. So the bell rang again, and Davy just hurried up. He didn't take care. He wasn't careful when he was dressing. He scrambled. Instead of the careful operation I could have wished under the circumstances, and went downstairs. There was some company. Dora was talking to an old gentleman with a gray head. Gray as he was, and a great-grandfather into the bargain, for he said so, I was madly jealous of him. What a state of mind I was in! I was jealous of everybody. I couldn't bear the idea of anybody knowing Mr. Spenlow better than I did. It was torturing me to hear them talk of occurrences in which I had no share. When a most amiable person, amiable means friendly, when a most amiable person with a highly polished bald head asked me across the dinner table if that were the first occasion of my seeing the grounds, I could have done anything to him that was savage and revengeful. So Davy is feeling uncomfortable at the dinner. He felt very special arriving with Mr. Spenlow in the carriage to the home and being asked to spend the weekend. And he felt like Mr. Spenlow's special friend. And so he started feeling jealous when he saw that a lot of people at this dinner party had a very close relationship with him. And he was confused by this feeling of jealousy, by seeing other people have a special relationship with him. And then he was extremely embarrassed because the man sitting across the table said, "Oh, is this your first time here?" And that made Davy very angry. It embarrassed him because he wanted it to look like they were great friends to everybody at the table. And then this question happened. I don't remember who was there, except Dora. I have not the least idea of what we had for dinner, besides Dora. My impression is that I dined off of Dora entirely and sent away half a dozen plates untouched. I sat next to her. I talked to her. She had the most delightful little voice, the gayest little laugh, the pleasantest and most fascinating little ways that ever led a lost youth into hopeless slavery. She was rather a diminutive altogether. So much the more precious, I thought. When she went out of the room with Miss Murdstone, no other ladies of the party, I fell into a reverie, only disturbed by the cruel apprehension that Miss Murdstone would disparage me to her. So when Dora and Miss Murdstone left the room together, Davy was worried that Miss Murdstone would say horrible things about him. The amiable creature with the polished head told me a long story, which I think was about gardening. I think I heard him say, "my gardener," several times. I seemed to pay the deepest attention to him, but I was wandering in the Garden of Eden all the while with Dora. My apprehensions of being disparaged, when somebody disparages something, they say bad things about it. So my apprehensions, my scared feelings about Miss Murdstone saying bad things about me, to the object of my engrossing affection, were revived when we went into the drawing room by the grim means serious, by the grim distant aspect of Miss Murdstone. But I was relieved of them in an unexpected manner. "David Copperfield," said Miss Murdstone, beckoning to me. Beckon, we've had that word many times. That means come here. If someone is beckoning to you, usually that means something like this. Beckoning. Come here. Or maybe like this. People sometimes do this. Or like this. That looks rude, right? But that means come here. David Copperfield, said Miss Murdstone, beckoning me aside into a window. "A word." When somebody says to you, "a word," that means, "I want to talk to you for a minute." "David Copperfield, a word. Come here and talk to me for a minute." It's a little bit rude. I confronted Miss Murdstone alone. "David Copperfield," said Miss Murdstone, "I need not enlarge upon my family circumstances. They are not a tempting subject." That means I don't want to explain to you my finances. It's not tempting. It's not a good thing for me to tell you that. "Far from it, ma'am," I returned. "Far from it," assented Miss Murdstone. "I do not wish to revive the memory of past differences or of past outrages. I have received outrages from a person, a female, I'm sorry to say, for the credit of my sex, who is not to be mentioned without scorn and disgust, and therefore I would rather not mention her." So Miss Murdstone is saying, look, let's not talk about the past. You don't talk about the past, I don't talk about the past. And then she starts talking about some problem she's having with a woman. I don't know. Miss Murdstone shut her eyes and disdainfully inclined her head. Then, slowly opening them, resumed, "David Copperfield, I shall not attempt to disguise the fact that I formed an unfavorable opinion of you in your childhood. It may have been a mistaken one, or you may have ceased to justify it. That is not in question between us now. I belong to a family remarkable, I believe, for some firmness, and I am not the creature of circumstance or change. I may have an opinion of you, you may have your opinion of me. I incline my head in turn." So she's saying, look, I don't like you, you don't like me, but I have a really good job here, and I don't want any interference. "But it is not necessary," said Miss Murdstone, "that these opinions should come into collision here. Under existing circumstances, it is as well on all accounts that they should not. As the chances of life have brought us together again, and may bring us together on other occasions, I would say, let us meet here as distant acquaintances. Family circumstances are sufficient reason for our only meeting on that footing, and it is quite unnecessary that either of us should make the other subject of remark. Do you approve of this? Do you approve of this?" So she's saying, I won't talk about you, you don't talk about me. Do you agree? Miss Murdstone returned. "Miss Murdstone," I returned, "I think you and Mr. Murdstone used me very cruelly and treated my mother with great unkindness. I shall always think so long as I live. But I quite agree with what you propose." Miss Murdstone shut her eyes again and bent her head. Then, just touching the back of my hand with the tips of her cold, stiff fingers, she walked away, arranging the little feathers on her wrist, round her neck, which seemed to be the same set in exactly the same state as when I had seen her last. These reminded me, in reference to Miss Murdstone's nature, of the fetters over a jail door, suggesting on the outside to all beholders what to be expected within. I'm not sure what fetters means here. Some type of jewelry or clothing. Let's see what happens if we get a picture of fetters. Oh, so I think it must be a type of jewelry. But Miss Murdston is a very serious kind of person. So the jewelry that she wears, maybe it looks like chains of a prisoner. All I know of the rest of the evening is that I heard the Empress of my heart sing enchanted ballads in the French language, generally to the effect that whatever was the matter, we ought always to dance. Ta-ra-la, ta-ra-la, accompanying herself on a glorified instrument resembling a guitar. That I was lost in a blissful delirium, that I refused refreshment, that my soul recoiled from punch particularly, that when Miss Murdston took into her custody and led her away, she smiled and gave me her delicious hand. That I caught a view of myself in a mirror, looking perfectly imbecile and idiotic, that I retired to a bed in a most maudlin state. Maudlin means like dramatic and very extreme feelings. Wait, let's see what the definition of maudlin is. Self-pityingly or tearfully sentimental, often through drunkenness. So imagine if somebody is drunk and, oh, I love you so much, man, you're the best. That's kind of maudlin. It's like overly dramatic, overly sweet feelings. So he's thinking, oh, Dora, I love Dora so much. That's a funny word. It's not very common, but that's a funny word. It was a fine morning, and early, I thought. I thought I would go and take a stroll down one of those wire-arched walkways and indulge my passion by dwelling on her image. On my way through the hall, I encountered her little dog, who was called Jip, short for Gypsy. I approached him tenderly, for I loved even him. But he showed his whole set of teeth, and got under the chair expressly to snarl. Snarling is, if you're a human and you snarl, you do this. That's a snarl. It's like an aggressive display of your teeth. I can't snarl. That's a snarl. So the dog was snarling. And wouldn't hear of the least familiarity. The garden was cool and solitary. I walked about, wondering what my feelings of happiness would be if I could ever become engaged to this dear wonder. As to marriage and fortune and all of that, I believe I was almost indecently undesigning then as when I loved little Emily, to be allowed to call her Dora, to write to her, to dote upon her, and worship her, to have reason to think that when she was with other people, she was yet mindful of me, seemed to me the summit of human ambition. I'm sure of it. It was the summit. The summit's like the peak of a mountain. It was the summit of mine. There's no doubt whatever that I was lackadaisical, young, spoony. But there was a purity of heart in all of this that prevents my having quite contemptuous recollection of it. Let me laugh as I may. Irma Westerbeck says, undesigning? Okay, well, this is like a particular problem of the era, because people with money would never allow people without money to have a relationship of any kind with them, maybe to employ them. But to have a personal relationship with somebody without money was absolutely forbidden. So even a friendship, any kind of friendship, you really wouldn't do that, because people with money would be very suspicious of people without money. To have a design on someone means to have a plan in your head about maybe how to get money from them, or how to improve your career from them. So Davy is saying, because Davy is taken to this place. This man is very rich. His boss, the owner of the law firm, he's very rich. He has a very beautiful house, beautiful horses, beautiful carriage, beautiful daughter. And Davy, he's not poor, but Mr. Oh gosh, I forgot his name already. Mr. Whatever is up here and Davy's down here. I mean, he's in the middle somewhere. The bottom is down here. So he's saying, I believe I was undesigning in my love, meaning I wasn't thinking about getting money from her family or advancing my career. I just loved her so much. And then that's why he goes and he says, well, let's go back and read it, now that we understand that word a little bit better. I believe I was almost as innocently, see, he's using that word innocent here. He's not thinking about money or career or anything like that. I was almost as innocently undesigning then as when I loved little Emily. So when he was growing up, he was in love with this girl, Emily. He didn't want anything from her. He just loved her. And that's the same feeling he had with Dora. Wow, I know like every detail of Davy's life. This is a really long book. To be allowed to call her Dora. So he's just thinking about how wonderful it would be to be close to her. To call her Dora by her first name. To write her. To dote upon her. To dote upon someone is to... Gizmo, come here. Oh, I thought I could use my dog as an example. They're never around when you need them. To dote on someone is to give it all kinds of love. Oh, I love you, you're the best. So that's doting on someone. So to be able to call her Dora, to dote upon and worship her, to have reason to think that when she was with other people, she was yet mindful of me. To think that when she's with other people, she's only thinking about me. And seemed to me to be the summit, the peak, the top of the mountain, the summit of human ambition. I'm sure it was the summit of my ambition. There's no doubt whatever that I was a lackadaisical young spoony. But there was a purity of heart in all of this that prevents my having quite a contemptuous recollection of it, let me laugh as I may. I had not been walking long when I turned a corner and met her. A tingle came over the head, over from head to foot. A tingle is a sensation. When do you feel a tingle? Let's see. I don't know how I can explain that word to you. Tingle, an experience or cause, slight prickling or stinging sensation. Oh, you know what? Let me ask ChatGPT to give me some examples of tingling. Okay, let's see. When someone whispers softly in your ear, imagine somebody blows in your ear very softly. How would that make you feel? That's a tingle. When you watch, let's see, when you experience a moment, if somebody does this very softly to you, very, very softly, what kind of feeling would you have? That's a tingle. let's see. Maybe somebody you love, somebody you're secretly in love with says, I love you. Then you would feel a tingle. So hopefully, amazing. So Irma Westerbeck says, amazing feeling which comes suddenly. Yes, but just imagine that. Like if you touch your face very, very softly and slowly, that feeling is a tingle. There's a tingle on your skin, very, very soft, very, very light. Or somebody breathes in your ear. That's a tingle. All right, so I had been walking alone when I turned a corner and met her. I tingle again from head to foot as my recollection turns that corner. My pen shakes in my hand. You are out early, Miss Spenlow, I said. It's so stupid at home, she replied, and Miss Murdstone is so absurd. She talks such nonsense about its being necessary for the day to be aired before I come out. Aired, she laughed. Here in the most melodious manner. So, ah ha 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 ha. On a Sunday morning, when I don't practice, I must do something. So I told Papa last night to come out. I must come out. Besides, it's the brightest time of the whole day. Don't you think so? I hazarded a bold flight and said, not without stammering, it was very bright to me then, though it had been very hard to me a minute before. Oh, so Davy says, yes, it is very bright now that you're with me. He didn't say it like that, but that's what he meant. Do you mean a compliment, said Dora, or that the weather has really changed? I stammered worse than before in replying that I meant no compliment, but the plain truth, though I was not aware of any change having taken place in the weather. It was in the state of my own feelings, I added bashfully, to clench the explanation. So, of course, Davy didn't mean the weather, but when she called him out, when she said, was that a compliment, or were you really talking about the weather? He said, the weather, it was the weather. Irma Westbeck says stammering, that's stammering. I never saw such curls. How could I? For there never were such curls, and those she shook out to hide her blushes, as the straw hat and blue ribbons which were on top of her curls. If I could only have hung up in my room in Buckingham Street, what a priceless possession it would be. Wait, I better read that again. If I could have only hung it up in my room in Buckingham Street, what a priceless possession it would have been. You've just come home from Paris, said I. Yes, said she. Have you ever been there? No. Oh, I hope you'll go soon. You would like it so much. Traces of deep-seated anguish appeared in my countenance. Countenance is your facial expression. So traces of deep-seated anguish is extreme pain or extreme suffering. Oh, extreme suffering, anguish appeared in my countenance. That she should hope I would go. That she should hope that I would go. That she should think it possible I could go was unsupportable. I depreciated Paris. I depreciated France. I said it would leave England. I said I wouldn't leave England under existing circumstances for any earthly consideration. Nothing should induce me. In short, she was shaking the curls again, and the little dog came running along to walk. Gosh, I'm getting tired, I guess. When the little dog came running along the walk to our relief. He was mortally jealous of me, and persisted in barking at me. She took him up in her arms, oh my goodness, and caressed him. But he persisted, barking still. He wouldn't let me touch him. When I tried, and when she beat him, it increased my sufferings greatly to see the pats that she gave him for punishment on the bridge of his blunt nose. She went like this, no, while he winked his eyes and licked her hand, and still growled within himself like a little double bass. At length he was quiet. Well he might be with her dimpled chin. These are dimples here. Here's a dimple on your chin. Upon his head, and we walked away to look at a greenhouse. You're not very intimate with Miss Murdstone, are you? Said Dora, my pet. The last two words were to the dog. Oh, if that had only been me. No, I replied, not at all so. Ah, she's so tiresome. Tiresome means she makes me tired. She makes me feel very tired. She's so boring. Ah, she's so tiresome. She is a tiresome creature, said Dora, pouting. Pouting is this. That's pouting. So showing disappointment, showing sadness like a child. Only really children pout. I can't think what Papa would have been about when he chose such a vexatious thing to be my companion. Who wants a protector? I'm sure I don't want a protector. Jip can protect me a great deal better than Miss Murdstone. Can't you, Jip, dear? He only winked lazily when she kissed his ball of a head. Papa calls her my confidential friend, but I'm sure she's no such thing, is she, Jip? We're not going to confide in any such cross people. Cross means angry. So Miss Murdstone's a very serious, angry person. That's always obvious. Let's read that again. Irma Westerback says confidential. Confidential means secret. Actually, let's take a look at that word since you ask. So you might see this stamped on a document or a folder, and that means it's secret. Don't tell anybody. You see that on documents a lot. See, confidential. Confidential. Don't tell anyone. It's a secret. The word confidence usually now means to have a very strong belief in yourself. But you can still use confidence in this way now, but it was much more common when this book was written, that to be in someone's confidence means you share secrets with each other. You don't really use it that way much in modern English. You could. It wouldn't sound weird, but it's not extremely common. Papa calls her my confidential friend. That means, by calling her the confidential friend, that means she can share secrets with her. And the verb is confide. Can I confide in you? That means, can I share a secret with you? Can I tell you a secret? Can I confide in you? Papa calls her my confidential friend, but I'm sure she's no such thing, is she, Jip? We are not going to confide in any such cross people, Jip and I. We're not going to share secrets with such angry, mean people. We mean to bestow our confidence where we like. So we want to share secrets with the people who we like, and to find out our own friends instead of having them found out for us. Don't we, Jip? Jip made a comfortable noise in answer, a little like a tea kettle when it sings. As for me, every word was a new heap of fetters riveted above the last. It's very hard because we have not a kind of mamma that we are to have. Instead, a sulky. Sulking is feeling bad, feeling angry. A sulky, gloomy. Gloomy is dark. A sulky, gloomy old thing like Miss Murdstone, always following us about. Isn't it, Jip? Never mind, Jip. We won't be confidential. That means we won't share secrets. We'll make ourselves happy, and we can, in spite of her. And we'll tease her, and not please her, won't we, Jip? If it had lasted any longer, I think I must have gone down on my knees on the gravel, when the probability before me of grazing them, and of being presently ejected from the premises besides. But by good fortune the greenhouse was not far off, and these words brought us to it. So Davy's in this situation. He's totally in love with her, and he feels like he can't stand anymore, and he's going to fall down on the gravel and hurt himself. Gravel, by the way, they're walking on a trail, and gravel is this. So he's saying, he's feeling very in love, and he feels like he could just fall onto the ground, but the ground is gravel, and he would get hurt. And also, that would be very strange, and they would make him leave the property if he were to act so weird. So he didn't do it. And anyway, they finally arrived at the greenhouse. So he was saved. He was safe. It contained quite a show of beautiful geraniums. Geraniums are a type of flower. We loitered along in front of them, and Dora often stopped to admire this or this one or that one, and I stopped to admire the same. And Dora, laughing, held the dog up childishly to smell the flowers, as if we were not all three in fairyland. Certainly I was. Loitering means standing somewhere and doing nothing. So actually, it's possible that you'll see, if you go to a store, at least in the United States, I don't know about other places, you might see a sign like this in front of the store. No loitering. That means you're not allowed to just stand there in front of the door. They don't like that, because that makes people feel uncomfortable if they have to go in or out of the store. So that's a very common sign that you'll see in the front of a building in the United States. No loitering. You can't just stand there and do nothing. So they loitered in front of some flowers in the greenhouse. Miss Murdstone had been looking for us. She found us here and presented her uncongenial cheek. Congenial means friendly, so uncongenial means unfriendly. And so she presented her uncongenial cheek, meaning, I guess maybe for a kiss. I don't know. Let's see. A little wrinkles in it filled with hair powder to Dora. Oh, so she presented her cheek to Dora. Like, give me a kiss. Give me a kiss. Hello. Then she took Dora's arms in hers, and she marched us into breakfast as if it were a soldier's funeral. How many cups of tea I drank, because Dora made it, I don't know, but I perfectly remember that I sat swilling tea, drinking a lot of tea, drinking it all at once, until my whole nervous system, if I had any in those days, must have gone by the board. And by, we went to church. Miss Murdstone was between Dora and me in the pew. A pew This is in a church. The pews are like the rows of seats. So, like this top picture is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Like there are like 12 pews in this picture. Pews are just like the long chairs of the church. I think that's the only time you ever use that word. I don't think that it's used for any other situation. Wait, let's see. If I just put pew, does it say anything? Pew meaning. A long bench with a back placed in rows in the main part of some churches. Yeah, it specifically mentions churches. I don't think that you use pew in any other situation. Miss Murdstone was between Dora and me in the pew, but I heard her sing, and the congregation vanished. A sermon was delivered, about Dora, of course, and I'm afraid that this is all I know of the service. We had a quiet day, no company, a walk, a familiar dinner of 4, and an evening of looking over books and pictures. Miss Murdstone, with a homily before her and her eye upon us, keeping guard vigilantly. Ah, little that did Mr. Spenlow imagine. Oh, that doesn't make any sense to me. Little did Mr. Spenlow imagine, when he sat opposite me after dinner, that day with his pocket handkerchief over his head, how fervently I was embracing him in my fancy as his son-in-law. So, you say that phrase, little did someone know, little did someone imagine, and that means they had no idea before what's going to happen later. So little did Mr. Spenlow know when he decided to accept me into the law firm that one day I would be his son-in-law. This was, of course, impossible because their situations are completely different. Mr. Spenlow is extremely rich, and Davy, he's not rich, but he's not poor either. I mean, he's sort of in the middle, but there's no way that he could ever marry Dora's daughter. This is crazy. But they're sitting across the table having tea, and Davy's imagining being his son-in-law. But it's just impossible. It's absolutely not something that can happen. Little did he think, when I took leave of him that night, that he had just given his full consent to my being engaged to Dora. So they're sitting having tea, and Davy's, in his imagination, is proposing marriage to Dora to his father, and his father says yes. And so as Davy's going to bed, in his mind, he's already agreed to let Dora marry him. So little did he know that I was his son-in-law. We departed early in the morning, for we had a salvage case coming on in the Admiralty Court, requiring a rather accurate knowledge of the whole science of navigation, in which, as we couldn't be expected to know much about those matters in the Commons, the judge had entreated 2 old Trinity masters, for charity's sake, to come and help him out. Dora was at the breakfast table to make the tea again. However, and I had the melancholy pleasure of taking off my hat to her in the phaeton. You take your hat off to someone if you're saying hello or saying goodbye. And he said, I had the melancholy pleasure, the sad pleasure of taking my hat off to her in the phaeton. So they were in the carriage ready to leave, and he had the sad pleasure of saying goodbye to Dora as they left, with Jip in her arms. What the Admiralty was to me that day, what nonsense! I made our case in my mind, and I listened to it, how I saw Dora engraved upon the blade of the silver oar which they lay upon the table, and the emblem of the high jurisdiction, and how I felt when Mr. Spenlow went home without me. I had an insane hope that he might take me back again, as if I were a mariner myself, and the ship to which I belonged had sailed away and left me on a desert island. I shall make no fruitless effort to describe. If that sleepy old court could rouse itself and present in any visible form the daydreams I had in it about Dora, it would reveal my truth. I don't mean the dreams that I dreamed on that day alone, but the day after, from week to week, and term to term. I went there, not to attend to what was going on, but to think about Dora. If ever I bestowed a thought, bestow is like give. If ever I gave a thought upon the cases as they dragged their slow length before me, it was only to wonder, in the matrimonial cases, remembering Dora, how it was that married people could ever be otherwise than happy. So Davy's thinking, he's a lawyer, well, he's doing legal things, and sometimes there are cases about marriage, about divorce or fights in a marriage, and Davy thinks, if I were married to Dora, we could never fight, we would only be happy. How do these people get married and then become unhappy? It's impossible. Prerogative means choice, but I guess it's a little bit more than choice. Let's see what kind of definition we can get from that. Prerogative. I don't remember reading that word. A special right or power or privilege. Yeah, I was thinking choice, but with privilege. But I guess privilege is the main prerogative cases. Wait a minute. Is that a different word? Prerogative. Yeah. Okay, well, he's a lawyer, and so if they're talking about prerogative cases, maybe that means who has the right to do what? Who has the privilege to do what? To consider if the money in question had been left to me, what were the foremost steps I should immediately have taken in regard to Dora. Within the first week of my passion, I bought 4 sumptuous waistcoats. Not for myself, I had no pride in them, for Dora. And took to wearing straw-colored kid gloves in the streets, and laid the foundations of all the corns I have ever had. If the boots I wore at that period could only be produced and compared with the natural size of my feet, they would show what state my heart was, in the most affecting manner. And yet, wretched, crippled, as I made myself by this act of homage to Dora, I walked miles upon miles daily in the hope of seeing her. Not only was I soon as well known on the Norwood Road as the postman on that beat, but I pervaded London likewise. I walked about the streets, where the best shops for ladies were. I haunted the bazaar like an unquiet spirit. I fagged through the park again and again, long after I was quite knocked out. Sometimes, at long intervals and on rare occasions, I saw her. Perhaps I saw her glove waved in a carriage window. Perhaps I met her, walked with her, and Miss Murdstone a little way and spoke to her. In the latter case, I was always very miserable afterwards to think that I had said nothing to the purpose, or that she had no idea the extent of my devotion, or that she cared nothing about me. I was always looking out, as may be supposed, for another invitation to Mr. Spenlow's house. I was always being disappointed, for I got none. Mrs. Krupp must have been a woman of penetration, for when this attachment was but a few weeks old, and I had not the courage to write more explicitly, even to Agnes, than I had been to Mr. Spenlow's house, whose family, I added, consists of one daughter. I say, Mrs. Krupp must have been a woman of penetration, for even in that early stage she found it out. She came up to me one evening when I was very low, to ask, she being then afflicted with the disorder I have mentioned, if I could oblige her with a little tincture of cardamoms mixed with rhubarb, and flavored with 7 drops of the essence of cloves, which was the best remedy for her complaint. Or if I had not such a thing by me, with a little brandy, which was the next best. It was not, she remarked, so palatable to her, but it was the next best. So Mrs. what's her name? Krupp, Mrs. Krupp, is saying, oh, I feel so sick. Do you have some rhubarb and clove and what was the other thing? Oh, cardamom. I'm sure Davy doesn't have any of those things. But if you don't have that, give me some brandy. I hate brandy, but give me some brandy, because that will help too. So obviously he's going to give her the brandy. As I had never even heard of the first remedy, and always had the second in the closet, I gave Mrs. Krupp a glass of the second, which, that I might have no suspicion of it being devoted to any improper use, she began to take in my presence. Cheer up, sir, said Mrs. Krupp. I can't abear to see you so, sir. I'm a mother myself. I did not quite perceive the application of this fact to myself, but I smiled on Mrs. Krupp, and benignly, as was my power. Come, sir, said Mrs. Krupp. Excuse me. I know what it is, sir. There's a lady in the case. Mrs. Krupp, I returned, reddening, so he was very embarrassed by this. Oh, bless you. Keep a good heart, sir, said Mrs. Krupp, nodding encouragement. Never say die, sir. If she don't smile upon you, there's a many as will. You're a young gentleman to be smiled on, Mr. Copperfull. And you must learn your value, sir. Mrs. Krupp always called me Mr. Copperfull. Firstly, no doubt because it was not my name, and secondly, I am inclined to think in some indistinct association with washing day. What makes you suppose there's any young lady in the case, Mrs. Krupp, said I. Mr. Copperfull, said Mrs. Krupp with a great deal of feeling, I am a mother myself. For some time Mrs. Krupp could only lay her hand upon her nankeen bosom, and fortify herself against returning pain with sips of her medicine. At length she spoke again. When the present set were took for you by your dear aunt, Mr. Copperfull, said Mrs. Krupp, my remark were I had now found a summon I could care for. So Mrs. Krupp, maybe because she's drinking, she's kind of reverting to some weird regional accent. But she's saying, when you first came to me, I said, oh, I can have this boy like a son. I could treat him like a son. Irma Westerbeck says summon. She's getting drunk, and she's kind of talking in maybe some kind of weird regional accent. So let me just reread it. I now found a son I could care for, and thank heaven. That's what she's saying. So, but instead of saying son, she's saying summon. And instead of thank heaven, she's saying thank heaven. I have now found someone. Oh, sorry. It's not some son, it's someone. So she's saying someone. I finally found someone I could care for, and thank heaven were the expression. I now found someone I can care for. You don't eat enough, sir, nor yet drink. Is that what you found your supposition on, Mrs. Krupp? said I. Sir, said Mrs. Crupp, in a tone approaching to severity, I have laundressed other young gentlemen besides yourself. A young gentleman may be over-careful of himself, or he may be under-careful of himself. He may brush his hair too regular or too unregular. He may wear his boots too large for him or much too small. That is according to the young gentleman has his original character formed. But let him go to which extreme he may, sir, there's a young lady in both of 'em. Mrs. Crupp shook her head in such a determined manner, and I had not an inch of vantage ground left. It was but the gentleman which died here before yourself, said Mrs. Crupp, that fell in love with a barmaid, and had his waistcoats took in directly, though much swelled by drinking. Mrs. Crupp, said I must beg you not to connect the young lady in my case with a barmaid or anything that sort, if you please. So Mrs. Crupp is saying that the man who lived here before, who died here, he was in love with a barmaid. That's like a bartender, but it's a woman. And Davy says, Mrs. Crupp, don't talk about the girl that I'm thinking about and compare her to a barmaid. Mr. Copperfull, returned Mrs. Crupp, I'm a mother myself, and not likely, I ask your pardon, sir, if I intrude. I should never wish to intrude where I were not welcome. But you're a young gentleman, Mr. Copperfull, and my advice to you is to cheer up, sir, to keep good heart, and to know your own value. If you was to take something, sir, said Mrs. Crupp, if you was to take to Skittles is a game, now, which is healthy, you might find it divert your time and do you good. So she's saying, go out and do something. Go play a game or stop thinking about this girl. Do something to distract yourself. With these words, Mrs. Crupp, affecting to be very careful of the brandy, which was all gone, she drank a lot of brandy, thanked me with a majestic curtsy and retired. As her figure disappeared into the gloom of the entry, this counsel certainly presented itself to my mind in the light of a slight liberty on Mrs. Crupp's part. But at the same time, I was content to receive it. So it was kind of rude for her to give suggestions to him. I guess maybe he sees himself as above her. And she's a landlady. I mean, that's her building, and he rents a room from her. Or maybe it's because their relationship isn't very close. But it was kind of rude of her to be giving him advice. But Davy was thinking, it's not a bad idea. I don't like that she suggested it. It's none of her business. But maybe I'll do that. I was content to receive it in another point of view, as a word to the wise and a warning to the future to keep my secret better. All right, well, that was the end of chapter 26 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I'll try to read chapter 7 tomorrow night at the same time. But I have a long day. I might be tired. Let's see what happens. But I will try, because I have to. I have to keep this moving. It's been a while since I read the last chapter. All right, well, thank you for staying and listening. Thank you for all of your questions and comments. And I hope that you return when I read chapter 27 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens.